How's it going, guys? Happy holidays to everybody watching and listening out there. Welcome to the latest Phil Talk Sports movie review with myself and Coach Luke Schultz. Today we are reviewing We Are Marshall. We picked a pretty good time to do this, I think. We're just about a month and a couple days past the 50th anniversary of the Marshall football team plane crash from November 14th, 1970. We probably planned to do this a little bit closer to the date, but Marshall did play today. It would have been a little better if they won. It would have made the story a little better. But, they did play their bowl game today, so that helped a little bit. But I have seen this before. This was Luke's first time. So just first thing I want to say about this is I think it's Matthew McConaughey's most slept on movie. I think when you talk great McConaughey movies, you don't talk about this movie a lot because his performance is next level.
I don't think he's known for being a sports guy.
No.
Maybe that's why it's not as well known, for at least when it comes to him.
Which is ironic because he is very much a sports guy. Like, he goes to every University of Texas game. He's always on the sideline. So,
but when it comes to his acting,
definitely. But yeah, to me, this is one of his more slept-on movies, and it's also an actor that's in it. I won't say it stars him, but he's definitely one of the more prominent roles as Anthony Mackie. As Nate Ruffett, one of the few surviving players on the team. I like him in a lot of stuff. He's in Crossover, which I like. He does great in Pain and Gain, and obviously as in the MCU.
Yeah, he plays Falcon in the MCU. 8 Mile.
Yeah, I forgot about 8 Mile. You mentioned that earlier. It's like, oh yeah, he is the guy that Eminem destroys at the end of the movie.
Like the Hurt Locker too, so he's got like that military. Mm-hmm. He's got a good military persona for when it comes to his acting. But yeah, he did really good in this movie.
Yeah.
Then you got Matthew McConaughey and Matthew Fox as the two coaches, which everyone knows him as Jack from Lost.
Yeah.
Let's see who else. Robert Patrick, but he was the first head coach. He died early on.
He's actually not even credited in the movie, which is interesting. Yeah. It's literally like, I don't know if it was stock footage or he had a free afternoon and they're like, hey, do you want to?
Probably did it pretty quick. Yeah. We just need you for 2 scenes, because he's only on the field and then in the plane.
Right. Yeah.
But you guys know him as the bad guy in Terminator 2.
Yeah.
But that was it. There's others as well.
People pop up, but that's definitely the main actors.
Definitely.
This is an interesting one to do because it being like we did Invincible, right? And that was a true story. But this is more. It is a sports film, but it's more of just a historical piece.
Yeah, I'd say so too.
So I think and the other difference with this is there's not, the whole movie has, if you count the game that the original team plays, there's only 3 games in the whole movie.
So they faced East Carolina.
Yep, which they lost.
They faced
Moorhead State, which was the big blowout loss when they come back.
Okay.
And then the game against Xavier.
So yeah,
and
they talked about the
rest of the season later on.
That's true.
But yeah, so it's for a movie about like a college football team to only you see 2 full games in the ending play of the first one. So like the football isn't really the key here. It's really the story. I think it's a story about community. It's obviously a story about rebuilding, story of tragedy, obviously all of which are historically accurate for the most part. When looking up, factual things about this movie, there wasn't a whole lot of liberties taken because I don't think it's just something you can take liberties with. You got to get it as close to the fact as possible,
because it would be dishonoring them.
Right.
I'd say that my keyword for this movie would be resilience. I know America's got a lot of issues, and always has, but one thing that we're definitely known for is being resilient.
Right.
And this is one of those movies that it shows it in sports. They lost their entire program and were still able to come back.
And you always see stories of like small town communities that care about their football team or whatever team it might be. In some shows, like we did Friday Night Lights, it could be the high school team or whatever. But you had no problem believing, if you've never been to Huntington, West Virginia, which I have not, you had no problem believing that this town is just engulfed by their football team. And I'm sure when the football team is done playing, it's the same about basketball and it's the same about baseball. And it's just something that continues for the university. I think when you're a town that's built around a college, as old as Marshall would be, this movie takes place in the 70s, obviously. They've been around a lot of time before then, and luckily, as you learn in this movie, they've been around since. They never missed a year.
When they were doing the introduction, actually, yeah, that makes sense, because they were talking about like everything where it's at in town, the the mining company next to the school, and in the center of the school is
Yeah.
this statue. So you're right, like everything kind of centers around that. But yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this before in past podcasts of how sport affects community, and it affects life in general. And this was a huge blow when the plane crashed. 75 people gone, and not just players and not just coaches, but city councilmen. And lots of other, 6 physicians were on that plane. I mean, so this kind of affected the whole, surrounding area, not just that community, but probably reached out to, I mean, to the point where even West Virginia University took that into account.
Yeah, which is their biggest rival. The final count on the death toll: 36 players, 9 coaches, 25 boosters, and within those boosters were the city councilmen and the physicians and people of that nature, and 5 crew members, obviously, on the aircraft. I don't know if it can't be. There's no way it's commonplace now, but it did surprise me to learn that boosters were allowed to fly with the team. Like nowadays, there's all these rules about people giving illegal money and so on and so forth. Like they kind of keep the boosters separate from the players as much as possible. So it did kind of it surprised me to learn.
Things back then.
Back then, I don't think it mattered. So that's probably why. But yeah, so with 36 players and that is pretty close to a whole team. Obviously, nowadays rosters are upwards of 80 and 90 people. Back then you probably an NFL roster has 53. I could see a college team having closer to like 45 or something. So yeah, that's your whole team right there in the 70s. Obviously, this is in a time where 2-platoon football is still a thing, but there are still probably plenty of guys to play both sides. So 36 to 40 people, that's a whole team right there.
He only had 4 left.
Yeah, so I believe obviously we talked about Nate Ruffin, who was the team captain. He had a dislocated shoulder, so he was gone. You learn about a couple of freshmen, which we'll get into here in a second. In the 70s, freshmen were not allowed to play as freshmen. There was a separate freshman team that you would play on. You'd play a handful of games, 3, maybe 4, against surrounding area teams with freshman teams. But it was essentially the JV of college, which it sounds silly to think about now because we see these freshman superstars come into college football, and we've seen freshmen win the Heisman, and back then they couldn't even play in their first year. So that's kind of interesting. So really, it's a bunch of freshmen. Nate Ruffin and I forget the last name of the other player, but it was Tommy something. You don't learn until midway in the movie. The only reason he was not on the field or in that game was he overslept and missed a flight to East Carolina, which is something that of course weighs on him. Nate feels bad not being there, but back then resources, no point in traveling injured players or the freshmen, obviously, since they can't play. They can't. When you go to a UCF game, you'll see the players with their jerseys on not in pads. Like those are the practice squad. The guys aren't, no reason they can't be there, but they don't travel to away games because that's just extra people to lodge and all that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it makes sense that the freshmen don't travel, the injured player wouldn't travel, and then obviously the person that overslept. But Nate Ruffin obviously feeling bad about not being there, but he had a legitimate reason to not be there. Whereas, it kind of eats up, the Tommy character for not being there.
I'm sure it adds a certain level of irresponsibility, thinking that maybe something could have changed, and it makes me wonder, does he think, well, if he was on the plane, that may have saved one other person's life or something like that,
right?
I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know about the freshman thing back then, kind of like what you said, being JV. And that's a much more bigger rule. I noticed just little things here and there that shows the time difference because it has been 50 years. Like, and this isn't very important, but one thing that just it kept ticking off in my brain every time the president would say NC2A.
Yeah,
I've always heard it as NCAA or NCAA.
I think that comes down to someone not knowing.
That it could be that. Yeah. I don't know if it was just a thing back then or if it was just him.
I've heard it from people that don't know sports talking about sports. It's one of those type things. But yeah, no, it is just,
and it's so small, but it was just one. I thought, okay, this must be because it's been so long, like
that it's been
something they
shortened.
said back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, overall, it's an interesting movie. Like Phil said, we didn't really see much of the game time. But what you did get to see was, I mean, every football movie, I should say, or any sports movie for that matter, has a certain part where they are talking about the training or they're showing the training. So you got to see a lot of that, which was really great.
Yeah.
But something that was unique about this film that I haven't seen in other football films yet is the recruitment process.
Yes,
because
that's a good point.
that was a huge thing where they had to recruit. I mean, an entire team basically
Yeah.
to fill in those slots. I gotta say, it was ballsy to go straight ahead into the next season.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a respectful way, because Ian McShane's character, who was the father of one of the players,
Yeah.
and he's also on the board for the school
University, yeah.
Yeah, for the university. He recommended, the town, the community kind of needs a break. It would be dishonor to the team and to the coaches to step onto that field so early.
This
And-
actually reminded me a lot of it. It's funny, something when the 70s could relate to now. It reminded me of COVID, where the people that were trying to figure out how to potentially play sports, there was the people that were like, well, can this be done? Should, is there even a feasible way to do it? And then you have the people that are like, nope, can't do it, shut it down, not possible. If you see a Facebook post about, oh, such and such is test positive for COVID, they're now in isolation, the first 3 comments will be, just cancel the season, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
There's always people that jump to the other side. This is obviously a more,
he had a tactical way of
to not play football in
Yeah.
this situation would have been a much more reasonable request, obviously.
Right. Like, he made a really good argument, and I honestly thought that's what they were going to do, was maybe because I knew about the incident, but I didn't know, exactly when the team, got rebuilt and whatnot. So I didn't know what the timing. I wasn't sure if they did take one season off and then went into the 1972 season. But no, I mean, like I said, that it was ballsy.
Yeah.
And he spends like all day calling different coaches on that list, and
And some of them
he
not
starts
even
off the day so proper and everything, because he was kind of like one of those fair people, very sophisticated. And he starts off the day with his phone calls, and he's dressed up nicely. And by the end, it's nighttime when he's making those last few calls, and he's just completely out of his suit, and you can tell he's tired as hell.
And the last few, you kind of get from the context of the conversation, they're not even necessarily coaches, they're just former players. That he's like, hey, you had a great career here, what would you think about doing this and whatnot. But yeah, the whole the concept of let's take a year, let's take 2 years off and rebuild, that's not so far-fetched. A lot of teams, like when SMU got the death penalty, no football for 2 years. When UAB had to discontinue their program, it took 2 years for them to come back. For whatever reason, when a team stops playing football for one reason or another, 2 years is just the gap that is usually given. So I don't think that came out of nowhere, which was good.
I do like that when he was talking to the 4 players that were still around, he was like, we're still going to honor your scholarships and all that.
Yeah.
And taking 1 year off, hopefully shouldn't affect their prospects. I'm guessing that the NFL would be willing to look past that, especially if they, kept training or maybe transfer to another school.
Yeah, usually in instances like this, if somebody wanted to transfer, they usually don't put any roadblocks in the way of that.
I just have a gut feeling that Marshall would have still honored the scholarship, even though it would have been off to another school. I don't know if there's certain rules about that. Yeah. But I mean, it's just,
I think once you transfer,
nothing like that.
The agreement of transferring is the agreement of that school then taking up that scholarship type thing.
Oh,
you know
okay,
what I mean?
Gotcha.
So we jumped ahead a little bit here. You mentioned, the dean or president of the college, whoever it is, not really knowing much about football at all, and really realizing after the fact that if you take a year or you take 2 years off, there's a chance that football doesn't come back in this town, and I don't know that our town will ever be the same if that happens. It's one of those, I never realized, as the person, I never realized how important football is to this town, and I realized it's the fabric of it. So to deny people of it is, denying their way of life, I think.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like we've talked before about how an intricate sport is weaved through society and all that, and a lot of people say I'm not a sports person, and I get that to a certain extent, but it doesn't take away the impact it has on communities. Yeah. Even if you're just talking about financial, the
economic reasons.
Yeah, economic reasons. Thank you. So I mean, it is huge. I mean, and the thing is, it's part of human history. It goes all the way back to the Greek Olympics. Yeah. And before, someone had to have been doing things before then. And we're not just talking about warfare. But human physicality. The human spirit is shown through that and through sports and competitiveness. And so it's so ingrained in our society. It's so ingrained in humanity, not just society. So even the people like the president who says, I'm not really much of a sports person. We see in this movie how much it affects him through the course, by the end, which we'll get to.
Yeah, by the end, it matters to him too. We mentioned the grief from, Tommy of sleeping in, the grief of Ruffin for being injured and not being on the flight. a whole nother level of grief comes with the assistant coach, Coach Red, where right as they're taking off, the head coach is not complaining, but he's like, oh, I gotta make this trip to a recruiting trip. As soon as we get home, I can get back in the car. He goes, you get on the flight, I'll take the recruiting trip. And he's like, he's doing him a solid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those, like, he's the assistant. When you're the assistant anything, your goal is to make the head anything's job easier.
Oh yeah.
So to me, that's
Lighten
him
the
being
load.
like, yeah, lighten the load. So to me, that's him being like, look, he's already pissed that we lost the way we lost.
Let me just take this one little burden off his
This is a
shoulders.
time for me to show my worth. I felt this is a chance for me to step up.
Especially because later he talks about how that's not what he was hired for. He was
Right.
hired as a receiving coach, and
Yeah.
he just kind of got through the recruiting thing.
Yeah. Which I think happens way more than, it happens at
I'm
any
sure
job you ever get. You
Oh,
think
yeah.
you're hired for one thing, you have to do that, but you have to do like
Oh,
6
yeah.
other things also.
I can tell you that as a teacher, that it's
Yeah.
not just teaching. There's
Mhm.
so much more.
Right.
But then it's like as the camera is showing the coach, and they say bye to each other, and
Mhm.
they seals the door. I gotta say, it's just one of those moments in the movie, and they didn't like hit it too hard. But if you know anything about what happens,
Going into it.
Exactly, that door closing, it's just like so final,
Mhm.
and kind of here's your doom. I don't know. It just seems so nerve wracking.
And I will say, obviously, this whole movie is about a plane crash. It's about what happens before and after a plane crash. I appreciate as a viewer the plane crash itself. Granted, you don't see it because that's not needed. That's not necessary.
No.
But
I think that would be disrespectful.
It's not like there's anybody to give a document. Like, what I understand from the view, I didn't look up, what's been told. I feel like the plane was struck by lightning. I think that's what we're led to believe, because you literally see
they
crack and the screen goes black.
Yeah, and right before that, you can hear the storm outside. So
Yeah.
they kind of use those clues, and they let the audience know, like, they're in the middle of this. They're not worried about it because it's such a short flight, and it doesn't seem
it's a 52-minute flight. I remember reading. So
it's just it's bad luck.
Yeah.
I guess you can say. I don't know if that's the right thing for me to say or not, but it's a tragedy.
In the movie aspect, I appreciate how they did it, because the movie, the movie isn't about the plane crash. It's about a town's reaction to a plane crash. So I think you saw enough of it to know what happened, but you didn't get any unnecessary like details that weren't needed. Really, once actually, before I get to that, one thing, an everlasting effect. Some people have heard this story, some people might not. John Madden, that the Madden games are based on, former Raiders coach, Raiders player, Hall of Fame announcer. From the time this happened, he was still a coach, and even later in his career when he was a broadcaster, since this plane crash, John Madden has never stepped foot on a plane because of it. So anytime he had to go to any part of the country, night trains. That was his thing to this day.
We were reading up on the trivia as well, and it was like 6 weeks before this incident, there was another incident that killed 39 people in Colorado. It was like Wichita
State, yeah.
Yeah, and they crashed into the side of a mountain.
Yeah.
And it killed about half of those 30. It was about 20 players, head coaches, and others as well.
Yeah.
So, within a 6-week period, 2 plane crashes. And I don't know if those are the only 2.
Right.
But I don't blame Madden, honestly.
Right. I'm surprised.
I'm not opposed to planes, don't get me wrong, but it's just,
I don't love them. I've been on a few in my life. It's not something some people can hop on a plane without a second thought. It's like getting on a bus. But for me, like, when I do, it's still like a thing. It's like, okay, getting on a plane now. Like, it's,
I'll admit, as of this moment, I've only ever been on a Cessna, one of those really small ones.
Okay.
And so it was only with me and 2 other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never been on an airliner or anything even close to it. But,
gotcha.
But yeah, like you said, the movie this is one of those focal points, but the movie isn't about it itself. It's about how the community, the team, the university, it's how everyone reacts, their resiliency, how they rebuild, how do we come back from this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely, it's interesting that the head coach ends up being an outsider.
Yeah.
But it goes to show, that's the American spirit. Because, and I know this is kind of like moving off topic from what I was just now going with, but one thing I have to appreciate that they did as a film crew and all that was, not only did they not show the crash, they kind of showed, you jostled there as the lightning hit.
And then you see the fire and everything else.
Right. And then you got to see the news being spread. And remember, it's 1970, so it's not like it's being spread on Twitter or anything like that. It's coming across the radio, it's coming across the TV, across the bottom of the screen, and letters. It's people are calling each other, and so you get to see all of their reactions as they find out the news, and that's something anyone. I mean, if you've been alive for a certain number of years, 20 years or so, or more than 20 years, but I mean, you remember when 9/11 happened, how that was spread.
Yeah.
And that's something that all Americans, I think, can appreciate. Like, we know how that when that information first hits you, it's a shock. It's a punch to the face.
Which I think actually, the first person we see get the news is either the owner of the diner, the manager of the diner, whatever. He picks up a phone, like a rotary, like on the wall phone. And he says, hello, and like a voice comes through the other end. You don't hear what it says, and he just kind of like drops the phone out of. He doesn't drop it. It just his hand gets weak, and it just falls.
That's
out
right.
Of his hand.
It's not
it's
too dramatic. It's not too dramatic. It's just like he's losing.
He freezes up, and
right?
Just loses the.
And one of the first ones was Matthew Fox's character. What's the coach's name?
Jack Lambert.
Jack Lambert. Okay, so he's filling up gas, and he's over again. The guy's filling up his gas for him and all that, which is also another thing that's kind of outdated, at least in.
Well, it is and it isn't, because I think
depends on where
in the Northeast. I think it happens. It still happens in some states, yeah.
But he's
certainly not in Virginia anymore.
No,
sure.
Yeah. But he's off getting peanuts, and they're in the middle of talking, but you can hear in the background the radio says something about plane crash, says something about West Virginia. And it's one of those, like, if you've been in the middle of a conversation, you hear something on the news, you're like, hold on.
Yeah,
Did you hear that? Did you hear what he just said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we've all kind of had that, and so I got to say it's very realistic, because I mean tragedies happen in America. Sadly, it's happened too many times. On obviously different scales, but they got that pat down. People's reactions. That was really well done on the film crew. You mentioned the radio stuff, and like I've seen this movie before. It's been a long time, so I was trying to look at it like not trying to remember things. I just want to watch it as it is, and I love the charm of the opening couple scenes where you're kind of getting acquainted with the town, and everyone's, the game is happening in East Carolina, and everybody's huddled around radios. You see the players in their dorm, the people at the diner, and like TV exists at this point, but apparently nobody in this town has one, because everybody, you don't see a single person at home watching it on TV. Even if they have a TV, though, are they going to be playing that game over in Not necessarily. I mean, I guess it's possible, but yeah. But the fact that you don't see a TV, even the news. I think you see one person have the news report on later in the night. But But the charm of people like huddled around radios to listen to the game, and then that same thing that brought them the joy of the game delivering the news later, I think is a really interesting dynamic. The delivery. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. But yeah, I mean, I can only imagine 1970. I don't know how many TV stations there were. Not many. Right. 10. Possibly. I've always heard from my dad and grandma. I remember when it was only 3. And then after a certain point, they played the national anthem, and went to black for like 8 hours a day. The static. The salt and pepper. Yeah, yeah. And so then that was it. But I'm sure that number one, not everyone had a TV, but even those that did, I don't think they would get that game. Actually, that's to assume that it's even being televised. Yeah, it might not be. Depending because we were talking about even in like NFL games in that time period, like you had to go to the bar. You had to go to the bar, and that if like you lived in Florida, for example, like you got the Dolphins game, and you got whoever they were playing, and that's about it. Local teams, like said, except for like a lot of people older than us might be Notre Dame fans in college and Dallas Cowboy fans in the pros, because that was the one team that was nationally televised. You got to see them every week, and even though they weren't where you were from, you at least like followed them because you could follow them every week. Something to watch. That's how a lot of that happens. So a lot of for people that talk about how much Dallas fan bases have, a lot of it was out of boredom in the 70s. So congratulations. So what would you consider? There's a lot of great scenes. Sorry, man. It's true. I mean, Notre Dame. You can ask anybody. They need to watch something. Yeah. I get it, but I'm saying if they had that tickled me. If they had the Cowboys game on and they had another option, by math, half the people would have potentially picked the other team to watch. So you never know. I like it. Yeah.
But so there's a lot of great, memorable scenes in this movie. Some for flat out funny reasons, because we mentioned McConaughey's performance in this. Well, as we were watching it, because we actually watched this one together this time, because I thought this was on Disney Plus. I thought this was a Disney movie. Apparently, it's not. Luckily, I had it. So, we watched it together. And about halfway through, I'm like, I don't think they told Matthew McConaughey anything about his character, because
He's just Matthew McConaughey.
He's just him
in this
being
movie.
him. But you mentioned the training camp, and you see a lot of the spring practice, and he's talking to the lineman, and he's like, you're smaller than him, so you got to go low. And the tall guy says, well, what do I do if he goes low on me? And he's like, well, then you sidestep and you head slap the shit out of him. Like, that was one of the funnier parts. And one of the trivia being, this is 1970. By 1976, the head slap was outlawed. So
just a couple of years,
yeah,
a few years
only
later.
lasts for a while. So that's probably one of the more funny scenes. I also love the when they're trying to get the dean to, he's writing letters to the NC2A, as he calls them, and rejected every time. It reminds me of Andy Dufresne, trying to get books for his library type scene. And so that happens, and then McConaughey says I'm going to call him McConaughey through this whole thing, because I know it's Jack Lambert. It's not Lambert, because that's a
we got McConaughey and Fox. Both of their first names are the same. So
right.
Yeah, let's just stick with
I'll
that.
go McConaughey. So he's like, are you married? And he says, yeah, married 25 years. He's like, I'm willing to bet that you did not propose over the phone. And I am damn sure that she didn't say yes in a letter.
And Matthew Fox is just kind of smiling in the back. He's got his head down, hands on his hips. And he's just he's kind of smiling like, yep, we got him.
So he ends up, going to St. Louis at the time, which surprised me, of all places, that's where the head of the NCAA would be, is in St. Louis, Missouri. I would think it'd be in Texas. I think it'd be in, I don't know. But at the time, apparently, and I don't believe that's the case anymore. But so he basically goes there, has like a face-to-face conversation.
In the rain.
Very dramatic, very, my town is hurting. My school is hurting. We need our football to begin to heal.
Yeah.
And we don't get to see the conversation, but you don't really need to. You just, that's
true. You just got to see the intro, and then they step inside.
And then he comes back still wet from, being in the rain in St. Louis, hands him this crumpled letter that, they open it and they all freak out. And it's the first happy moment of the movie, really, is the ability to bypass the rule that says you can't play freshmen, which gives them a huge edge in recruiting. You can now go to any recruit and say, hey, look, we're not the best team, we're rebuilding, but you will get to play and probably start every game as a freshman, which is something that no other team can offer.
Yeah, it provided an incentive. And before that, I mean, the movie was showing how much trouble they were having with recruiting.
Yeah, West Virginia dominating the recruiting at the time.
Oh yeah, at one point he's got 12 basketballs in one spot and one off to the side, and that's they got that one
guy,
and the other 12 were all with West Virginia University.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What was interesting, and I'm glad that they covered this, and it was real quick. It didn't take too long, but they actually had to recruit a coaching staff first.
Yes.
So it was just him, and then he went to go get Matthew Fox, and Matthew Fox, when he was just building sheds, just trying to work through the grief.
Which, can I talk about this shed scene for a minute too?
Yeah.
So, he's fixing the roof of his shed, and McConaughey walks up. He's like, "What are those, 2x4s?" And he's like, "No, they're 1x6s." He goes, "Oh, all right." And he takes a lot of interest in these 1x6s boards for some reason, because they have their conversation, which we'll get into. But even when he leaves, he goes, 1x6s, same amount of space, less board, and just walks like he's like a, I don't know, lumber expert, but his interest in his 1x6 boards tickled me a little bit for whatever reason.
I mean, I could be wrong, but maybe he's analyzing, this is how this guy thinks, which is different, which is good. You need someone who can kind of think outside of the box, or at least think a little differently. I don't know, or maybe he's just humorous. Yeah,
I think he's just trying to make conversation. Because the conversation they're really trying to have is a tough one, so he'd rather talk about.
He started light, they went deep, and he didn't even really have to do too much talking during that. Matthew Fox is the one who did the talking.
Yeah,
and then they go back to light as he leaves again.
It's like in the corporate world, they call it a compliment sandwich. You start with something good, you end with something good, and you put the criticism in the middle.
Okay.
Like, oh, you're doing such a great job around here, Luke. This needs to be worked on. But again, man, you're doing such a great job. We're happy to have you here. It's one of those conversations.
Yeah,
because Matthew Fox, and it's an obvious choice, is the first person to get offered the head coaching job.
Yeah, well, I think he's the only person from the coaching staff that survived, right?
Because he wasn't there. Because he went on the recruiting trip.
Yeah.
So he comes up and he's, I have a proposition for you. And he said, I'm afraid that you might, because he knew it was coming.
I think the president already tried to get him to come back and be the head coach. So this is the second trip now from someone else, though.
Which he does, it's like, I'm not trying to make you the head coach, because he understands that it's not from a lack of like loving the town or loving the team. It's
grief.
It's grief, and it's responsibility that you might not be prepared for.
There's that, and the story he kind of goes into is that when he got hired on as the receiving coach,
yep,
he also had to do the recruiting. And so in his first year, he was able to recruit 20 kids. And so he visited 20 homes and promised 20 mothers, that he'd be watching over them and all that. And all of them were dead at that point.
Right.
And I couldn't imagine. I'll admit, that's one of those moments where I was just like, I couldn't fathom that sort of responsibility on his shoulders and that he feels like he completely failed at. And he's like, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
And so, and that's when he kind of just looks at McConaughey and he's like, I forgot exactly what he said, but he's like, can you tell me how to get around this? And or something like that. And he's like, I don't know, and I'm glad that he was honest, because up until that point, I think McConaughey's character was kind of
goofy,
a little too goofy for me, where, he seemed like he was going into a situation that he took way too lightly. And that was the first serious conversation where he goes, I don't know, and I'm glad that he was honest about it. And it he threw him into the deep end with the emotional part where he's like, look, this is a lot deeper than you think. There's a lot going on across the community right now.
He did make it, like you said, he almost came in like trying to lighten the mood in a situation that wasn't ready to be lightened yet. It's
there's always that person who makes the joke too early.
Yeah, I'm usually that person. But
cheers to that.
Cheers. But you're right. He's goofy for a bulk of this movie. I made the joke for those watching the video, not the audio. You play a drinking game every time Matthew McConaughey smacks his hands together and kind of leans forward with them. Especially when they're talking about, like formations, and he wants to run the I formation and all this stuff. He has his kid like run straight into a tree. He's like, well, if he had a fullback blocking for him, that tree wouldn't be there. Yeah. And you're right. He's extremely goofy, and it's really not till he's there.
He did say to the president, he's like, I want to, help this community out when I heard what happened, but that's about as deep as he got.
That's about as deep as he is too.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, he's trying to be a good Samaritan, and all that, and help out the community. But I don't think he understood, like, he didn't fathom how difficult this was for that.
Because they even asked, he's like, I think I'm in a position to ask, like, what's your angle? Like, what are you getting out of it? And the truth be told, that there was no interior motive of taking this
which
job.
Is good. At least he's not trying to prey on, a situation and just get an easy job or something.
Because he, at this time, I believe it was Wofford is the name of the college that he was coaching at, which is a Division III school. So this is moving up to, in the 70s, the lines are a little more gray, but this is either one of the higher Division II schools or a mid-level Division I school, depending on the year. So it's a job improvement on paper when you unfactor the the emotional tolls of the town. So is part of it to parlay into a better job, quote unquote? Maybe, but it could be a situation that I feel like I'm right for this. They need someone.
I hope that wasn't the singular motive of the person in real life.
I can't imagine that being the case,
especially because he stuck with them for the next
3 or 4 years.
Yeah, he stuck with them for a while, and they didn't have a winning streak or anything.
No, the most wins they ever had in 1 year was 4.
Okay,
so a 4-7 was
his overall was 9-33. So it wasn't about winning.
No.
It was about it was about the school. It was about the community, and that's cool. That's good as an outsider to step in. So yeah, I mean, he was a bit quirky and in the beginning. I didn't exactly like him, but after that conversation, he goes back and he's not giving up. I got to give him that. He goes up to the board and he's ready to start recruiting on his own.
Yeah.
And then Matthew Fox enters in from behind him, and he says, "All right, I'll
give you 1 year."
1 year, and so he turns around. And he's like, "Well, we better get started right now, then."
And you find out at the end of the movie that held true. That
kept his word.
Not only he was only there for the 1 year, and he never returned to football, which in a way is sad, but in a way maybe that was his way to have peace with everything. Like, to go, like, I helped get the program started again, and that's fulfilling enough for me to go do something else with my life.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned, like, they have to build the coaching staff first. I would have maybe liked because it's like a montage where they sign the other coaches. I would have liked to learn a little more about these other coaches, because for any coach to take this job, it's probably a unique situation. They're a unique kind of person. I'm sure in real life this was a more quirky staff anyway. So I would have maybe liked to learn a little bit more about the coaches, but I think the reason you don't is while they're in the rest of the movie, they're not very prominent. So they're background people.
There was one that took he was on the screen a bit and he had a few lines, but no, like the other one's not at all.
Yeah.
And the only one that I know of, I don't know what his name was. He just looked a lot like Danny Glover.
Yeah.
From like the Lethal Weapon series.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. But yeah, I did like the scene though, because even though it's real quick, you see the two of them in their green polos, and they're signing on one guy, and then in the next scene,
there's three guys with polos.
They're signing on the next guy, and it goes until they have like all six.
The full room.
You just see the room is getting fuller and fuller of these green polos, and I thought that was comical and smart and
that
quick.
Was a great effect. Yeah. That's how it must feel too at the same time,
Wait, next interview, like that guy's probably only been in the green polo for an hour. If you're trying to recruit people that quick, he's like, I've set up these interviews back to back to back to back. This is my interview day.
Right.
That way we can knock it all out, and if I like him, and we'll hire him.
How bad of an interview do you have to be to not get that job in this climate?
I think a selfish prick would not get it.
Right.
If
you come off as a halfway decent human being, I think you're getting this job.
I think as long as you have a decent like base knowledge of what you're going to be coaching, if it's a line or if, whatever it is,
For sure.
And so I think that would be the minimum requirement. And then, are you a decent human being? So 2 factors.
Yeah,
that's just a guess, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how big the coaching pool was for hiring back then.
And then it jumps into a similar montage of, you mentioned the recruitment of freshmen for the first time, but they also, and this is something I would have maybe done first, is they go looking at other programs at the school. They go pick off a 7-footer on the basketball team. The catcher that's not afraid to like plow somebody over coming into home. Like they're
showing off they're showing off their skills like as they're recruiting them. So you had the basketball player that all he had to do was stand there, and the other person ran into him. He just knocks him back, without even really having to push. And then, like you said, there was the catcher who ends up just knocking the
soccer player that kicks clean over the bar. Could have been good from 50.
They
just walk up and they just take him. Like, no, you're coming with us.
Yeah. And as soon as that happened, you were like, you're in the wrong sport. That had me laughing.
So I did enjoy that montage. I do think I'll let you answer first though. If you had to pick your favorite scene for either comedy or sentimental or emotional, if you had to pick like a favorite scene, what do you think it would be?
Ah, shit, man, you kind of blindsided me with this.
All right, I'll go first then.
All right. So, favorite scene of the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll think on it.
Okay. So my favorite is I guess you're kind of combining two, but the whole when they decide they're going to run the veer, and they have to go to West Virginia to kind of learn about it, and that's obviously the biggest rival.
Okay.
And they get there, and it's for multiple factors. They're waiting for Bobby Bowden, who's of course legendary Florida State coach. Started his career at West Virginia. And every time I watch this movie, it's long enough ago that I always go, oh yeah, Bobby Bowden was there. And it's that nice little, nod to history. And McConaughey has taken the biggest trophy off the second shelf of the trophy room. And he's like, man, look at that thing. And he's looking, it's one thing to like pick up. It's one thing to be staring at their trophies. It's another to take one off, but to take the biggest one off the second shelf.
Well, the thing is, what's great about that, sorry to interrupt, but is they layered the comedy. So at first it just starts with you see his reflection in the trophy.
Yeah.
So you think he's just looking at the trophy and talking about how good it is and all that. And then the camera shoots to a different angle. He's holding it and you see it's a huge fucking trophy.
And then when the coach comes out, he's like, oh, let me put this back. And he puts it on the second shelf. So you're right. That's what the reason is.
Comedy. Yeah,
you're right. You're absolutely right. So that's the comedy of that scene. And then he meets Bobby, and he's like, hey, we're thinking about adopting the veer, and he's like, wondering if you can help. And there's like a beat of like, are you serious? Like he
thinks they're just joking around.
Yeah, like he laughs and everything, and he's like, oh, okay. And when they're talking about even doing this, he goes, Red is like, what do you think they're gonna like buy us lunch and show us their film room? He's like, we're gonna have to buy us lunch. We'll get food on the way. And then so then they're in the film room, and he goes, by the way, guys, if you're hungry, there's a little spread next door. Help yourselves. And he walks off, and they look at each other, and he's like, God damn it, they not only are we in their film room, but they're buying us lunch.
Well, like they were like, are you serious? And he goes, we're not playing you this year.
Yeah.
And you can tell. Like my dad always called Bobby Bowden. Sorry, I don't know why we were just talking about. My dad always called Bobby Bowden the last Southern gentleman, at least in football. One of my favorite coaches at UCF. Well, actually, he's a professor at UCF, but he coaches at Edgewater High School. I had him in 4 different coaching classes when I did my sport and exercise science major. His name is Jeff Duke. And I don't think he'll ever see these, but
if he does, shout out Coach Duke.
Yeah, I don't know if you even remember me, but I had a lot of fun in his classes, and he actually coached at FSU way back, and got to coach underneath Bobby Bowden. He was there for the first horse and spear, thing.
Nice.
He said it went kind of awry the first
time,
I'm sure, just a little bit, but yeah, Bobby Bowden, not only does he offer them the food and all that, he says if you need to make duplicates or copies of anything, talk to Janet or whatever her name was, and she'll help you out. And that's so fucking cool. And then I'm sure we're about to lead into
again, you get the layered comedy, you get the almost the heavy moment of no, we're serious, and he's like, oh, okay. And as he leaves, he does the comment of, they growing big down in Huntington. I'll say, basically, you had the balls to come in here, so what am I really going to say to you? Is the way
I missed that comment.
Yeah, he's like, man, they growing big in Huntington, let me tell you, as he's walking out of the room. And to me, that just says oh, you had the balls to ask, so here you go. And then, of course, they're watching some stuff, a couple minutes go by, a couple frames go by, and 2 West Virginia players walk into the locker room to probably also watch film. And Bobby comes behind him and is like, hey, we're in the other room today, guys. And they turn around to face their coach, and they have their helmets under their arm, and they put the Marshall M in green and a cross in green on the back of their helmet. And that's kind of commonplace today. A lot of this particular year, there's a lot of Black Lives Matter stickers on helmets. There's a lot of, when Mackenzie Milton got hurt at UCF, there was the Ohana sticker. Helmet stickers are a thing now. But you
back then, you can
tell it was hand-drawn too.
It had to start somewhere. Yeah. You know what I mean? There has to be precedent set, and that's one of those first universities, I'm guessing, that did something that meaningful.
And to do it for a rival team.
Yeah.
And there's when they turn to look at Bobby looks at them, and then he looks past them, and he looks at the coaches, and he sees that they see the sticker. And there's a moment of, I don't want to call it embarrassment, because there's nothing to be embarrassed about, but this isn't. You could tell they didn't do it so that they knew they did it. They just wanted to do it.
He's a gentleman. He's a humble guy.
So he's like, he notices that they notice, and then when the kids walk off, he takes the helmet from one of them. He goes, colors clash a little bit, don't they? And
he tries to make light of the situation.
And he goes, it's first class, coach, which, anyone that's ever heard any story about Bobby Bowden knows that he's first class all the way, and it started way back before he was even at Florida State. So what you talk about layered comedy, just the layered of emotions of that 3 minutes is easily my favorite part of the movie. So,
and I know this might be going a little further along, but this just goes to speak about what you can do with sports, how it translates over to molding people into decent human beings. And it starts with being a decent human being first. If you have a good coach who, knows enough about life, how to treat people the right way, how to, be rough and loving at the same time, because I'm sure Bobby Bowden, it would be tough to work under him. You know what I mean? He's not gonna, but he's also, like I said, a gentleman. It's that's just something Jeff Duke always talked about, was being able to coach with heart, and being able to mold people, not just men, but they talked about it a lot, especially in football, but molding kids into adults, molding them into good human beings. And that's just a stand-up, first class, like he said, first class,
if in one of my more recent episodes, when I talked to, Mike Klein, which you haven't seen the episode, definitely check it out on the playlist. I think it's one of my better ones for sure. He's a defensive coordinator at Spruce Creek, and we talk about is the goal for every coach to be an NFL coach? And to some people, the obvious answer might be yes, but for a lot of coaches, it's college or high school, because that's where they feel that. And you hear this about teachers too. I want to coach / teach at this level because it's where I think I can make the most difference. Whether that be elementary, high school, college for some people. So it more comes, I think, when you become a coach, it's where do I feel I can make the most impact? Some people want to coach, think they can help adults and make grown men into better men. Maybe that's what I think they need to be.
Yeah, and honestly, some of those grown men could use that.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe they didn't have the best upbringing, but like those times that you're talking about, elementary, middle, high, and college,
You're dealing with
those are
completely different types of people.
oh yeah,
through the
they're
whole thing.
detrimental times and growth periods and all that. I mean, like I was saying, Jeff Dukey's coaching at Edgewater High School right now, or at least last I heard. I graduated,
which has a fantastic football program on top of
Well, the thing is, he's not the head coach. He could be, but he's the offensive coordinator.
Right.
The head coach is his son. He says that's his dream. He gets to coach underneath his son.
Yeah, which is an awesome story.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Now, that was also a few years ago. I don't know if that's still the same situation.
I
graduated
do know
in
Edgewater High School is very prominent in state playoffs and stuff. So whatever they were doing then, they're still doing now because they're still
maybe
doing
he's
well.
still there. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's just one of those things where, I mean, depending on what level you best fit, you can make a huge impact. I mean, I know just in elementary school, and this is just from a phys ed point of view, not a sports specific point of view, but I see kids from the age of 4 through 11. So that's obviously a huge gap, and I have to try to acclimate to each class that comes out, especially because I get 6 a day. So it's like, okay, if I've got K1 5, well, I have to be in that younger kid zone, make them real excited, and then by the time 5th grade comes out, I've got to get a little
more stern,
a little bit more stern. I don't want to like ruin it for them, but yeah, I've got to, you know what I'm saying. So, I mean, I'm sure even for middle school and even for high school, it's different, because you're dealing with not just the student or the athlete, but you're dealing with what's going on in their lives as well.
Right.
And everyone's got baggage. And that's why I tell my kids, everyone brings baggage to school. You got to learn, how to carry it the right way. And I think that's what a coach can do. A coach can help with things like that. We went a little off the rails, didn't we?
No, because I think this movie, aside from the 1 or 2 players you get, this whole movie is done from a coaching staff, mostly the 2 coaches you said, but like there's more scenes of practice in this movie than gameplay. So I think seeing everything from the coach's perspective, it's easier for you to do when you are a coach, but it's something that happens in this movie because that's the view that they present you with 80% of the time.
And that's another thing too, is the coaches have to deal with, especially the 4 or the 3 athletes who are still on the team after, they're not the freshmen, but like Anthony Mackie.
Yeah.
What was his character's name again?
Nate Ruffin.
Nate Ruffin. Well, I guess not character, since he was real.
Who he played, yeah.
People who are dealing with loss, who are still student athletes, who are still willing to go, and how to keep coaching them, while they're going through 75 deaths. It's just that, I mean, that's a big burden, not only on the student athlete, but the coach who's trying to help them through this.
Which you got to look at it from the perspective of the kids that came in, and we get a brief insight into this. It's not very long. I wouldn't have minded if it was a little longer. But after the first game where they lose pretty big to Moorhead State, the one kid throws his jersey on the ground, and the one guy's like, "Hey, pick that up. That's I forget the first name, Joe Hood, something Hood name. It's his jersey." He's like, "Listen, man, I'm here to play. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can, but I'm here now. I'm number 36 or whatever he was." And like the only thing more difficult than being from that town and knowing about the loss to me would be being in that town and not fully understanding the loss and trying to be as respectful as you can without it hitting you personally.
Right. Or, well, even if he was affected, it's okay. Now he has to fill these shoes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're going through a loss of a game and all that, that can be frustrating. Like there's going to be an emotion that hits first and foremost over something that's been lingering for a while, and that takes over, and it's like throwing that jersey down. He doesn't realize that
that's disrespect to other people.
Right. He's just dealing with what's in his head at that moment.
And it's not so much that they lost. I think it's more how they lost. If they lose 14-20, the emotions aren't as high. It's like, hey man, like, for everything we've been through, we're looking good. We're going to look towards next week. Like, I don't think the locker room would be happy, but they'd be like, all right, like this is.
It could also be expectations of look at what we just went through. Do we really need another loss on our hands? And so after going out there and putting everything on the line for 60 minutes and then still losing, and after everything that just happened, he could be just mad at the entire situation. There's so many layers psychologically of what could be going on. And so that actually kind of make all of this, the last 5 minutes of the podcast, kind of makes me think of what I think right now would be my favorite scene would be the scene between Matthew McConaughey and Anthony Mackie's character when they're both in the locker room alone, and he's saying his shoulder is fine, because they need him to rest his shoulder before the next game. And he's got his finger on, this, his shoulder right here, because this shoulder right here, and he starts slapping it just lightly, but enough where he can feel it. And
when you have a dislocated shoulder, it would still hurt.
Oh yeah. And he's like, my shoulder's fine, and he's just tearing up, he's welling up, and you can tell it's so much more than, it's not just physical pain or anything like that, but he wants to be out there so bad to honor his fallen teammates. He does not want to be sidelined or anything like that. And he says, he's cracking his voice and all that, and starts crying. He says, that was my team. And, after just recently dealing with, like the loss of Leah and all that, where, whenever I have to tell someone, that was my baby, it's like, I understand to an extent, I didn't lose 75 people.
Yeah.
But to say, that was my team, like, because he was the captain, right? Before the loss?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So he has a certain level of feeling of responsibility, and so even though it's not his fault, it's just a natural tragedy, there's that level of I need to do this,
Might be the best bit of pure acting in the movie, because as we mentioned, McConaughey's himself for 80% of this, so I think that that performance by Mackie might be the best pure acting in the whole movie.
Anything I've seen him in, actually, and not taking away from his other roles, that scene alone was incredible on his part.
Right.
So hats off to Anthony Mackie. Is going to watch this.
Oh yeah. Good job, bro.
Yeah.
Loved you in Crossover. And what was the other one? Oh, Pain and Gain. Love Pain and Gain. He's like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
He was in that.
to be the third guy behind The Rock and Mark Wahlberg, that he still gets his moments in that movie.
See, that's the thing, is like Anthony Mackie, he's been fit like his entire life.
He's like the sixth man of Hollywood. He's just there to make. He's not the star, but he will make everybody better around him.
Oh yeah,
because he's there.
I think he easily could have been in like The Expendables or something.
Yeah.
Like that,
yeah. If they remake those in 10 years, he's gonna be in it.
It's like I said, it's just, everyone else, they've kind of had their rise to being the most fit person and all that, and again, Mark Wahlberg and Dwayne Johnson and Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, all of them have, but he's got the longevity, I think, because it's been like from day one with his acting career to now, he's still, it's like he's not aging.
Right.
I don't understand.
He looks exactly the same in every movie I've ever seen. Like, this is one of his earlier ones. We Are Marshall came out in 2006, I want to say. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, easily one of the earlier. I think Crossover was 2008 maybe, and Pain and Gain obviously much later. But no, this was a good look into the future of a really good actor. I think was this movie for sure.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned the Morehead State loss, and it makes a lot of people wonder, like, did we do the right thing by playing? And the Coach Red, the assistant coach, he storms off in a practice and he's like, listen, I didn't agree to do this so we can go get pity applause in front of every team we play in the country. Like, that's not what this should be about. The last words I heard from our coach before he died was, winning is the only thing that matters. So we can't honor them by having a team that loses, which to an extent makes perfect sense for him to think that.
I think he had these visions of grandeur, like the next season is going to be great. The fact that we actually got it off the ground, we were able to fill in these slots. Okay, we're going to do great now. But leading up to that was actually, we can go back to this in just a minute, but what led up to him storming off the field, I do want to get into that.
Yeah,
after we finish this.
Take that.
Oh, well, Anthony Mackie, he's angry.
And he's laying people out left, right, and center.
And that's the thing, is you get to see his character go through kind of like the stages of grief. Yeah. And so
he's at the anger stage at this point.
Yeah. And this is before he had the locker room conversation with McConaughey. But he's laying people out left and right. The thing is, he's holding himself back well enough where he's not outright breaking into fights, but he's goading.
Yeah.
He's kind of
wants
inviting.
the fight to get started.
Right. Yeah. But he's not going to take that first step. I got to say, as a captain, that's smart. If you're gonna do this at all, he kind of went about it the right way. Again, still not the classiest thing, but it eventually gets to the point, because the camera's so focused on Matthew Fox, the only coach that is there, that
and he can see what's happening.
Right. I think he was in the same mentality, because he was angry too, but he ends up taking the anger out on him.
Yeah.
And
so he lays out the quarterback. So they run an option offense. So like in practice, if they read right and the quarterback's gone and they feel it necessary for him to run 60 yards to the end zone. Once they realize he's wide open, all right, cool, come back to the huddle. Like, he's no longer running. He's like, okay, I read that right. On to the next play. Safety comes across the field and creams him.
Right.
And,
There's no reason to injure your own teammates.
Right. And so, like, again, the way he did it was actually – he had an answer for it too. It was like, what the hell was that?
It was like, I'm technically not crossing the
line. He was
line.
like, hey, you guys tell us play to the whistle. I played to the whistle.
Exactly.
And he's like, no, dude, that's bullshit. And he shoves him over.
He just straight up, he knocks him on his ass.
Yeah.
And then when he yells down at him, he's like, you think you're the only one that's going through this? You think you're the only one that's had it rough? That's some good acting on Matthew Fox's part. I got to give him that. He just does those 2 lines. Mm-hmm. He doesn't keep going like, a typical coach might just keep yelling at him and all that.
See, I think he would keep yelling at him if it was a normal, like, football reason.
Right, but this was something that was emotional that they both went through.
Right.
And so that's why he leaves it at that and he just storms off.
Yeah.
But he puts him on his ass. He puts him in his place. Mm-hmm. What I mean.
And there's actually a really good visual.
It doesn't show him angry again after that.
No.
Yeah, I think he
immediately calms down. But as he's walking away, you see Matthew McConaughey in the background, and you see Mackie on the ground, and he's still sitting there, just kind of like decompressed. And it's like it's a cool visual because he's like sitting there. He's like, him and McConaughey are almost too close to each other, in a sense that neither of them even recognizes that the other one's there because they're both looking at Fox.
Right, and the thing is, the camera's not even focused on them.
No, they're out of focus and everything.
They're out of focus, but they're still – that's what I love about, like good actors, that even if they're not the main focus, they keep doing their part.
Yeah.
Wherever it is on screen, you know. And
because you could – if the shot was McConaughey helping Mackie up in the background, it wouldn't have been as powerful. The fact that they're both sitting there, like, absorbing what just happened made that so good.
Perfect word, absorb. Yeah, they're absorbing. Yeah, that's right. They're taking it all in.
So then we get to the Xavier game, where the difference too with the Moorhead in this is a home game.
He had to win. He had to win Matthew Fox over first because he was done after that.
Right, and that's when he had the we can't honor a team by losing when the coach, the whole thing I said a minute ago.
Well, he meets him in the church though, and he says kind of the whole, it's not all about winning. He's like, when your team is in a good state, yes, it can be all about that. But right now we're rebuilding and all that, and just being out on the field is honoring them. And
he basically says, and it's a good point where he's like, one day we will get to the point where, yes, all that matters is winning and nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be today. It's not going to be next week. Probably not even next season. But he's like, the world that you want to live in where winning is the only thing that matters, that should be the goal, to get back to that place. He said, one day we're going to wake up and that's going to be all that's on our mind because everything else has been, not
and that
fixed.
Makes me kind of sad because Matthew Fox's character didn't get to see that through. He stuck with his word. He did his one season, but then he never returned to football. Mm-hmm. So he didn't get to get that day because that season they only won 3 games. 2.
Yep.
So that may have helped him along, but I think in the back of his mind, he knew, I'm not going to get to see that.
Which, to be fair, Matthew McConaughey's character, 9-33 as head coach, he not necessarily got to see that either.
No, that's true.
Which, interesting fact about his character, he then went on to be an athletic director. He bypassed coaching. He was at the Naval Academy, of all places, and that's the reason he's in the Hall of Fame, where his long stint as the AD at the Naval Academy. He went on to AD at, like, Temple and a few other places. So aside from, handling that situation at Marshall, he's most known as you tell the story of football in this country, he's more known for his athletic director than his, which is not the right word for that, but you know what I mean. Athletic director-ness is not a word.
Career?
Yeah, his career.
AD career?
Yeah, his AD career. But, so we do, at that point, you're right, neither of them see it through, but I think I would imagine, have solace in knowing that they put them on the track to get there. Because Marshall does, which I'll save this for the end, but they do in fact get there. Spoilers for anyone that hasn't watched football in the last 20 years. So they get to the Xavier game, and again, the biggest difference, the Moorhead State game was an away game, and this is a home game. And Matthew McConaughey, he's playing with his kids. His kid runs out the front door, and he goes to follow him, and he sees the entire population of Huntington, West Virginia, like walking to the stadium, just out in the street. Nobody's driving. A couple people on bicycles. That's about it. And he sees
college town.
He sees for the first time the character of a game day in Huntington.
And he even says it with his son. Is that what you're about to get into?
No, yeah.
Oh, well, he's like, can you say it with me? Game day.
Game day.
Game day.
Yeah, so he gets to see that.
It reminds me of you because every time UCF has a game day, I get a text from you.
Way too early in the morning.
Yeah,
too.
it's
Just
like
game day.
7 a.m. Game day.
Sometimes I have to wake up to send it and then just go back to sleep, But
that's awesome.
Yeah, he so they go to the they're at the game, home game, and obviously it's a much different situation, playing at home for the first time. And I will say, I'm not gonna talk about the game necessarily like play by play, but I will say that we just did Invincible and we got to poke some fun at the choreography,
the film crew,
the filming of the actual playing of football. There was some things, but I will say, granted, this takes place about 10 years earlier than Invincible, the style of football, because Invincible's in the 80s, it's in the 70s, so the game's a little slower, a little more basic, but I feel like they captured 70s football very well in this movie.
And you did mention there's like even less equipment, but I think the biggest hole that the sound is that what we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So if you saw our last podcast, or it wasn't our last one, but if you saw the podcast that we did on Invincible, we were kind of having a little bit of fun with
the sound effect choice.
Yeah, when they were doing the kickoff return and everyone's just getting smashed left and right on the Eagles.
It sounds like car crashes.
Oh my God! Whoever was in charge of the sound, I mean, they did awesome, but I don't think it sounds that way. I mean, I've only been in pads a couple times, but it does get loud. Don't get me wrong, but it sounded like little tiny explosions were going off as people were getting
like
hit.
Michael
like
Bay
they were wearing like it's
Michael Bay's in charge of this.
Michael Bay directed that scene. So this one, like you said,
a lot more realistic. Even
taking in those factors of it's 10 years earlier, and the play was more basic and all that. It still sounded more closer to the target. It actually could have been a little bit louder. But that's only if you're inside of the helmet, again, I don't remember it too well, because I mean, shit, that was 13, 14 years ago.
Right.
It wasn't very long, it was like a spring training. That was it.
Yeah.
But it was much more realistic, and I got to give credit to them for that. Like I think you said this earlier tonight, was this movie was based more about like history and facts and not really about
the football.
Right.
You saw enough of you didn't feel gypped. You weren't like, I didn't get enough of the sport, but I think you got the perfect amount because, again, you knew that the game went back and forth or whatever. There's a little segment in the training sessions where the basketball player that they recruit, he doesn't know the name of routes, so they're like, when I call a post, it means you run and then head towards the post. When we run a flag, you head towards the pylon. The reason it was called back in the day before the rubber pylons were invented, there was little flags there. That's where the term comes from. But and that comes back because the winning touchdown is him running a flag pattern to go open the big tall receiver in the back of the end zone.
I did not notice that. Yeah. That is good storytelling. Yeah. I didn't know.
And honestly, it's great storytelling, but I don't know that they gave they didn't let that breathe enough for you to get it, I think.
Okay, so it was foreshadowing, but it was so light.
Yes, it was a light foreshadow.
That's cool.
So that they do win the game. I think it was 18-15 was the final in that one. Which was the accurate score. I doubt it's how the game. All these shows go. Like if they were, let's say they were ahead most of the game and they just hold them off. Like that's not as exciting as scoring the touchdown at the 2 seconds left in the game. So I don't know if that's how the game really shook out, but the score is accurate to real life.
Right.
So that's all you really would ask for at that point. So they win. People rush the field, and one of the other cooler scenes at that point is he hops the rail, which you mentioned McConaughey's hops in this movie
when he. Yeah. All right. So the last score of the game is the touchdown. I
think it's when he kicks the field goal before half when he jumps the first time. Because they take the lead into the halftime.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But they show the entire sidelines like jumping up, and I mean, when you see a mass of people jumping, no one really stands out. But for some reason, I just happened to notice Matthew McConaughey had this. He had like gigantic vertical jump.
9-foot vertical leap.
Yeah, he's up there and he's doing like a split. He's got his one leg out like straight in front of him, and the other one is kind of like hooked up underneath towards his ass. And I was like, damn, he can jump really fucking high. And not even 5 minutes later, because they're all celebrating out on the field. The president is off on the in the stands, just up the steps. But instead of going up the steps, Matthew McConaughey. Damn it.
Matthew McConaughey.
Need another drink. Matthew McConaughey just leaps up the stands, and it's not like the first level of the stands either. This is up on
It's
the
like
second
2
level.
rows at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he leaps up, and granted, he doesn't get all the way up where his ass is immediately on there.
But he jumps enough that he can pull himself up.
Yeah, he barely has to pull himself. Like he's already up about waist height.
You think there's like a little trampoline that we don't see in the shot?
I don't
for
know.
that one anyway?
I don't know. I mean, it's 06. Matthew McConaughey has always been a fit dude. Like,
That's true.
Not like a super buff guy or whatever, but he might be into fucking Pilates
Nimble
or spry.
shit, I guess. Yeah.
He's like Captain America, just leaping around like a motherfucker.
So he gives the ball to the president. He said, well, he explains, he goes, after a game, we tend to give.
He takes into account that the guy doesn't know.
So he takes a minute to explain. He goes, after a game, we give a game ball to the most valuable player. And the look on his face is like, not like he's about to get it. It's just like he's learning something. He's like, oh, that's cool. Well, thanks for telling me.
He's like, well, I'm not a player.
Yeah, well, no. First, he's just like, oh, that's good information to have. And then he hands it to him.
Oh,
and
right.
He
says, yes.
He's like, but I'm not a player. He's like, and his last line in the movie, which was perfect, is, we're Marshall. We'll take anybody. And slaps him on the ass for what I believe is the 5th time in the movie.
We were going to do another drinking game where every time Matthew McConaughey slaps somebody else's ass, we drank. Because that was the second one within like a 3-4 minute period.
But once you win a game, as I mentioned, I think there's like a 5-minute buffer where you get unlimited ass slaps. So especially a game that big. But so they win the game. They go on to tell.
Well, I just wanted to mention this is one thing we brought up earlier, where the president, we've already said it a couple times, he knew like nothing about football, and so he didn't really have much investment in it, other than he was the president of that university. Earlier in the movie, he later from that point,
after they lose the first game,
right after they lost
relieved
the first game,
of his duties,
the board votes him off, and so he still shows up to this game against Xavier, but not as the president. He shows up out of personal interest.
Yeah,
and I gotta say that was really cool, because it's like, he may not understand, he doesn't really get it, but the spirit, he's got spirit,
which even when they score the game-winning touchdown, everybody's jumping around,
looks to the guy,
and he goes, did we score?
So I gotta say that's really cool, and again, that kind of talks about how sport affects community and all that. He cares about the people, he cares about the team, he cares about the coaches, even though he's not even tied with the university anymore. He could easily pack up his things and
go. Yeah, I tried to help these people and gone.
Yeah, go ahead and just continue working on his career. No, he's got a personal investment. I love that little.
So his mini arc of learning to love. Maybe not love football, but love what it can do for people, I think definitely happens. The love for which I don't think he didn't have love for that community, because I don't think you can be the president of a university and not care about the community.
I gotta say, there's some fat cats that really piss me off, and deans and all that, and but this guy seemed genuine.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's just based on how the movie decided to film it.
Right.
I don't know how he was in real life, but I like that. That's someone that I can appreciate at the very least.
And so the movie, we kind of, they dropped some historic facts afterwards. They mentioned, we mentioned the 9-33 record that the coach has before he moves on. And not only does Marshall rebound, but they do get to the point where, wins and losses are all that matters. They've won 2 national championships at the Division II level. They had Randy Moss played at Marshall. He was the star player on that team. They've had other Pro Bowl quarterbacks like Byron Leftwich and Chad Pennington and great Marshall players have graced the NFL and everything. And Marshall is easily one of the more respected programs countrywide, I think. I mean, when UCF was
like prestigious.
Yeah. And UCF, when they were in Conference USA, Marshall was one of our biggest rivals. We played them in a bowl game last year. That one happened to go our way, but we have a lot of great memories against Marshall. We had a losing streak of 12 straight games that ended by beating Marshall, and that's the video you see in the Citrus Bowl where people were tearing down the goalposts. That was against Marshall. So as UCF fans, there's a lot of connection. I've seen my first UCF football game ever was in 2011, and we went and saw them play Marshall in an absolute downpour, a game that's been nicknamed the Monsoon versus Marshall. So my first college football game at UCF was them playing Marshall. So like,
I gotta admit, I don't remember what my first game was. It was during that 0-12 season, though.
Yeah,
but I don't remember who we played.
All those blur together.
Those, I can forget. I think I tried to forget. I'm still trying to forget.
Right.
Not that O'Leary did a bad job. Just it was a good time to retire.
Yeah, it was a stale ending for sure.
Yeah.
But so as a team, I've seen play in person a handful of times, and even when not, I've watched them play plenty. It was funny because their bowl game was on today as we record this, and I was like, it would have been a little nice to see them, win the day we're going to do this, but they did lose to Buffalo today. But they did play at least the day that we recorded this, so that's one thing.
Okay, and we're close enough to it's been 50 years and
50-year anniversary.
It's pretty close,
but it's the 50th anniversary of the season still. So I mean that fits.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and again, Marshall, I've always considered them, and I've always liked they've never become too big for their britches. Like no matter what bowl game they go in, they're gonna care enough to try and win. They're never a team that has people like opt out of the games to get ready for the draft, even when they have plenty of people go to the NFL and everything. So no, Marshall's always a team I've always quietly, I don't know if root for is the word, but I've always respected. More likely than not, I'm cheering for them in a game. There's only a handful of teams I think I would pick above them. So to get to reflect on their history a little bit here, or what I believe will be the last episode of 2020, I think was a good way to end it.
Oh yeah.
We're not going to say what we're doing next because we got a couple ideas, but be assured that we do have a lot more of these coming.
I hope you guys keep on watching. I've been enjoying doing these. I remember when he first presented the idea, I was totally down, but I thought it was just, I mean, we are having fun, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more to it. And it's there's a lot of bonding going on. Not that I don't get to see, I mean, not that we haven't been able to bond before, but even to the point where I go up and visit my friend Jordan, and I'm going to go and do a shout out for you, Jordan Hunt, where he was telling me the other day.
Who has listened to a few of these, so I'm sure he'll hear this one.
Every single one.
All right, well, Jordan, we appreciate it, man.
He said every time that you and I do one, he listens to it, and so he's liked a few of them. I think
he wants us to do Sandlot, so I'm going to try my best to put that on the short list to come up sooner than later.
He's always got great ideas.
Yeah. Usually I name the movie we're going to do next. There's a couple different directions we might go with this, so I'm not going to say it yet. But what I will say is stay tuned. 2020 has been a hell of a year. We have tried to make the best of it. One of the few good things that have come out of it is this spin-off to my regular podcast where we do the movie reviews.
I think we got a lot to go.
I'm
very excited.
And we'll end this on a cheers. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. And we'll see you guys in 2021.